what to do about reflux symptoms at night, skid marks in your underwear, and a pulsing abdominal mass. You've got questions, I've got answers on the first Gutbliss Podcast listener Q&A. I'm Dr. Robynne Chutkan, gastroenterologist, microbiome expert, and author, and I am here to help you find gut bliss. On today's show, I'm going to be answering 3 questions from our listeners that I'm really excited to dive into. If you have a question or a gut health story that you'd like to share, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me through the contact page at gutbliss.com. So our first question is from Albert, who says, I started having acid reflux about 6 months ago. My symptoms got a lot better when I quit coffee. I was drinking 2 to 3 cups daily. But I still sometimes get symptoms at night, and I'm not sure what to do. So Albert, good on you for getting rid of the caffeine, because caffeine is definitely something that is associated with acid reflux. But the first thing I want to make sure that everyone understands is that reflux is not caused by overproduction of acid. Literally 99.9% of people with reflux have normal acid levels. Overproduction of acid is a rare disease called Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, ZE for short, that affects about 1 in a million people. So if reflux in 99.9% of people is not caused by overproduction of acid, what is causing it? It is caused by inappropriate opening of something called the LES, the lower esophageal sphincter. And that's the muscular sphincter between the bottom of your esophagus and the top of your stomach. So that is a valve that when you eat or drink, it opens up to allow the food to enter the stomach. And then after you eat, it closes. But what can happen sometimes is that it opens inappropriately during the digestive process after you've eaten. And now food and acid is coming up from your stomach into the esophagus where it's not supposed to be. So what causes this inappropriate opening of the LES? Caffeine, alcohol, and smoking are high on the list, and unfortunately so is chocolate, because chocolate contains caffeine plus something called theobromine, and both of those substances can cause the LES to open. A high-fat diet is another big reason, and that's because fat is much harder for the stomach to digest. So when the receptors in your stomach sense that the food you're eating has a high fat content, they slow down the emptying of the stomach. And so that's why you feel full when you eat something that has a lot of fat in it. Fat is very sating. And it's also why high fat foods are associated with reflux. Overfilling the stomach is another big one, because when your stomach is too full, things are going to start going back up through that LES into the esophagus. And late night eating. And I'm going to explain why that's such a problem in a minute. So it sounds like Albert already has his caffeine intake in check. So congratulations again on that, Albert. But I suspect that his nighttime symptoms may be due to a combination of the fact that he is eating his largest meal at night, like many of us do, and he may be eating a little bit too late. So I would advise Albert to create a curfew for his last meal. And the best rule of thumb is to try not to eat or drink anything after the sun sets. Now, I know that can be challenging, especially in the winter, because depending on what part of the world you live in, it could be pitch black at 5 o'clock. But I want you to remember this really essential piece of information, and that is that peristalsis in your GI tract, those muscular contractions that move things through, peristalsis is tied to the light-dark cycle. Something called a circadian rhythm. That's our 24-hour cycle of light and dark. And so if you are eating after dark, when your GI tract has essentially gone to bed, the food is going to sit there in your stomach for much longer than it would earlier in the day, and it is going to potentially back up into your esophagus and cause reflux symptoms. So I would advise Albert to try and eat his largest meal earlier in the day, ideally at lunchtime, and to have a lighter dinner, probably something like soup or a salad or just a small portion. It's really important to pay attention to portion size at night. The exact same meal that you will probably tolerate with no problem at all at 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the day will likely cause reflux symptoms if you're eating it at 9 or 10 p.m. We are designed to eat and digest our largest meal in the middle of the day, or actually in the morning, when we need those calories for all the activities we're going to be doing during daylight hours. We are not designed to take in those calories at night when we're resting. And it's easier to change your habits than to fight your physiology. So Albert, I want you to think about a lighter, earlier dinner. And thank you so much for your question. The Gutbliss Podcast is brought to you by Visbiome, my first and quite frankly, my only choice for a probiotic. Whether you're dealing with irritable bowel syndrome or just looking to restore your gut health, Visbiome can help. It's a medical food for the dietary management of IBS and gut inflammation, backed by science and clinically vetted by thousands of my own patients. Find your Gutbliss with Visbiome. Go to visbiome.com/Gutbliss and use discount code Gutbliss at checkout. We are back with our second question from our listener Q&A. And this is from someone who did not want me to use their name, which is totally fine. And the question is, this is very embarrassing, but I'm seeing a smearing of stool in my underwear most days, and I'm not sure what's causing it. I have a bowel movement almost every morning, although I usually have to strain a little to get it all out. And I try to do a good job cleaning up. But at night, when I get undressed to take a shower, I notice that I frequently have staining in my underwear. So thank you so much for this question. And even though sometimes these things are embarrassing to talk about, fecal staining and straining and so on, it's so important to ask these questions. Why? Why is this happening? Because this is feedback that your GI tract is giving you. So let's talk about what's going on here. Fecal staining is caused by seepage of stool into the underwear, what we in the GI world sometimes call skid marks. And it's actually quite common, and it is a sign of incomplete evacuation, meaning your rectum is not fully emptying when you have a bowel movement. You are leaving a little stool behind, and that stool is seeping out into the underwear. The rectum is the very end of your colon, and that's where your stool is stored before it comes out. In order to have a bowel movement, various muscles in your pelvic floor, including your internal and external anal sphincter muscles, they have to coordinate to release the stool. And sometimes that coordination is a bit off. For example, you may think that you're pushing the stool out when you're trying to have a bowel movement, but in reality, you may be clenching those pelvic muscles because you're stressed or feeling anxious. And here's the thing, those pelvic muscles have to relax in order for you to have a successful bowel movement. And that can be hard to accomplish when you're feeling tense. Clenching those pelvic muscles when the stool is trying to come out means that you are literally going to cut off the stool before it can all come out. And you're going to end up leaving some behind, which again can seep out later in the day and cause fecal staining. Pelvic floor dysfunction is one of the major causes of incomplete evacuation. And if you want to learn more about that, check out episode 2 of the Gutbliss podcast called Shy Bowel. It really is still one of my favorite episodes. If you have pelvic floor dysfunction and you are having incomplete evacuation, or maybe you're having difficulty evacuating altogether and you're having difficulty getting any amount of stool out, you probably need a formal evaluation and maybe some testing. The test that we typically do is called anorectal manometry. And I will definitely do a full episode on pelvic floor dysfunction and testing and diagnosis. But for now, if you think that may be going on, one of the things that you need to focus on is really trying to relax those pelvic muscles when you are on the toilet. The other main cause of incomplete evacuation is a bowel movement that isn't bulky enough to come out all in one nice big log. So instead, you have to squeeze it out like toothpaste. And just like with toothpaste, there's often that last little bit that's left in the tube that's really hard to get out. You're trying to flatten the tube to squeeze it all out. So it sounds like what may be happening with our listener is that after their morning bowel movement, there's a little nubbin of stool left behind in their rectum. And that nubbin is working its way out into their underwear later in the day as their GI tract is stimulated to contract by activities like eating and movement. And so what they need to do in this case is to bulk up their stool to make sure that they're having a nice, large stool that comes out of the rectum without a lot of effort. They should not have to be pushing and straining, which is what happens when you have a more narrow toothpaste-like stool without a lot of bulk to it. So how do you create this nice bulky log instead of a narrow toothpaste-like bowel movement? The secret is fiber and water. I highly recommend increasing your consumption of my favorite high-fiber foods, which are beans, berries, and broccoli, or doing a green smoothie with lots of greens first thing in the morning. The other thing you can do to help increase your fiber intake is to add a fiber supplement like psyllium husk. And please make sure it's a kind without any artificial sweetener. You want to mix a heaping tablespoon of the psyllium powder in a big glass of water in the morning and chug that down. You can drink a sort of second chaser of water after to help get it down. But you want to make sure you do that in the morning so that the fiber has plenty of time to get through your 30 feet of digestive superhighway. If you have it later in the evening, when your GI tract is less active, it can end up getting stuck and bloat you. If the fiber alone isn't working and you're still not having a nice bulky stool, you can try adding a little magnesium at night. And of course, remember that your digestive tract is plumbing. It is a long tube that goes from the mouth to the anus. And what do you need to make sure the products of digestion move efficiently from the top to the bottom? You need water, plenty of water. My rule of thumb is drink at least half your body weight in ounces of water. So if you weigh 150 pounds, that's 75 ounces. If you weigh 200 pounds, that's 100 ounces of just plain water that is really going to help to create a nice, big, bulky stool that evacuates completely and does not leave any skid marks. When we come back, our third and final question. Our third question is from Jessica, who says, I feel a pulsing mass above my belly button, and I'm concerned it could be a tumor or something worrisome. What Jessica is probably feeling is her abdominal aorta. That's the main blood vessel that delivers blood to the rest of our body. And especially if you are relatively slender, you can often feel it pulsing because it's an artery, and so it has a pulse, and it runs through that abdominal area. Now, people often feel pulsing from the abdominal aorta when they are lying on their back because that tends to increase blood flow in the area. So if you're lying down on your back or pressing on your stomach, or sometimes if you've eaten recently, if you're pregnant, that can increase blood flow, but depending on how pregnant you are, it may be difficult to feel the aorta through the pregnancy. But a normal abdominal aorta is almost certainly what Jessica is feeling above her belly button. A tumor would be very rare to feel a pulse within a tumor because even though tumors do have a blood supply, they typically don't have a big arterial blood supply that's going to create a pulse like what she's describing. But I want to point out that a pulsatile mass in that area can also be a sign of something worrisome, and that is an abdominal aortic aneurysm. We sometimes refer to that as a AAA in medicine. And an abdominal aortic aneurysm is an enlargement of the aorta in the abdominal area. We see it most commonly in older men and smokers, but we can see it in anyone. And it is a serious and it can be a life-threatening condition if it ruptures. As an abdominal aortic aneurysm grows, some people may notice a pulsating feeling near the belly button, but it usually has accompanying symptoms like pain in the back or abdomen or side. And the pain may be severe, it may be sudden, it may be persistent or constant. It may spread to the groin, the buttocks, or the legs. And it may be a sign that the AAA, the abdominal aortic aneurysm is getting ready to rupture, which of course is a life-threatening emergency. Additional symptoms, if a AAA is getting ready to rupture or has ruptured, include passing out, clammy skin, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, rapid heart rate. You can even go into shock. So again, this is a life-threatening emergency. But this does not sound like what Jessica is describing. The advice I would give Jessica is that this is almost certainly just your abdominal aorta that you're feeling, because you're not describing any other accompanying red flag symptoms. But if you have any concerns or you develop any accompanying symptoms, you should definitely talk to your doctor and ask about an abdominal ultrasound to check it out. So I want to leave you with 3 takeaways from our first listener Q&A. Number 1, if you are suffering with acid reflux, think about eating a lighter, earlier dinner. And of course, think about caffeine and chocolate and smoking and alcohol. Number 2, if you are having fecal staining or seepage in your underwear, make sure that you are bulking your stool with a lot of fiber, that you're drinking enough water, and that you are also relaxing those pelvic muscles so that you can have complete evacuation and not leave any stool behind in the rectum that can seep out later. Number 3, if you feel a pulse above your belly button in the middle of your abdominal area, that is likely your abdominal aorta you are feeling. It's the largest artery in your body, and because it's an artery, it does have a pulse. If you have any accompanying symptoms with that pulse, especially pain, you should definitely get that checked out to make sure you don't have an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which, again, you are much less likely to have. It is probably the normal aorta you are feeling. So that's it for this edition of the Gutbliss Podcast, Q&A edition, and my plan is to do one of these a month. My goal is always to provide you with content that matters to you. So please reach out with your questions. I would love to hear from you. You can DM me on Instagram at Gutbliss or use a contact page on my website at gutbliss.com. And what would be really great is if you sent your question as an audio file with you asking it yourself, and then I'll play it on the podcast instead of me reading it. You can use your name or not, whatever you're comfortable with, but it would be awesome for people to hear you asking your question in your own voice, if you're okay with that. If not, I'm happy to read it. Coming up next week on the Gutbliss Podcast, the gallbladder. Should it stay or should it go? Everything you need to know if you are contemplating gallbladder surgery, if your gallbladder has already been removed, or if it is simply misbehaving. Go to gutbliss.com for my free 7-day microbiome reboot course. If you like what you're hearing, drop a review and hit that subscribe button. And remember, dirt, sweat, vegetables, the best prescription for a healthy gut.
The information presented in this show is not meant to be medical advice. Consult your doctor before making any decisions about your health. The patients discussed are real people, but names and identifying features have been changed to protect their privacy.